From fine art to the funky, soup tureens have been making a statement since the early 1700s. I'm Jackie Ferris. This week on the 302, we are at Winterthur taking a look at the Campbell soup tureen collection. Get ready to tuck in that napkin. The 302 is ladling up some history. They are decorative dishes for delicious and decadent dining. I'm talking, of course, about soup tureens, but where did they come from? Well, we know for sure there are some that date back to the 1700s right here at Winterthur in the Campbell soup tureen collection. I'm joined by Ann Wagner. She is one of the curators of decorative arts here. Ann, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm happy to explore some of the tureens here in the Campbell Gallery at Winterthur and to talk about some extravagant examples of vessels for the table.
Now, when you look at the tureen, some of them here are so fancy, some of them are so simple, whimsical. Going back to the 17th century, dining was a lot different. These days, we think of tureens for Thanksgiving, a special holiday meal, but these were really the opening act to dining like we don't see anymore, right?
Oh, exactly. I mean, if you could think about having one of these tureens on your table throughout a Thanksgiving meal, I think it would really be an eye catcher and an unusual event today. But they were designed to do that. They were designed in an era of dining that we can hardly imagine how prescripted or how the etiquette and the performative or theatrical aspects of a meal could be. And I think these had a very large role in the setting, tying into sometimes architecture and design of a space, as well as serving a course in a meal. And they were very much things to be admired and to be explored with your eyes, if not touched at some point, if you were a diner who was at the table.
I can only imagine if this is one piece on the table, what the rest of the table must have been like, because of course you have the entree, which is the big fanfare, the reason everybody comes. So when you look at these different tureens, you kind of have a flashback to where it might have started. There's a couple of theories, right? One being, the helmet, someone eating out of a French helmet,
Can you imagine that?
So, but we don't really know about the history and where it all started, right?
We don't, and there certainly are some theories, and there were courtly traditions, so royal households of having, and particularly silver and gold, elegant displays of vessels and platters and serving trays and things that were just on view during a meal, not necessarily in the act of serving. But the tureen becomes this vessel, and I'm talking about one tureen because we maybe are surrounded by individuals here, but they were often part of an ensemble. They were maybe 3 to 5 tureens in different sizes that were part of the table decor, and many of them had, and some of them still do here, a tray or plateau, some kind of a way of presenting it in this sort of magisterial way, this position that it had, kind of anchoring it onto the table and the display. And they were part of an ensemble with candlesticks, with silver and in some cases even porcelain spoons and forks and knives. So it's when we look at an individual tureen, we have to use our imaginations and just call into our eyes that whole space and this theatrical environment, or a table designed to impress.
Sure, definitely a mark of your status, how great your tureen was.
Right.
But you have so many tureens here as part of this collection. I guess it started in the 60s. Can you give me a little history about when it started and when it made its way here to Winterthur?
Absolutely. So, and most of the tureens in this collection date from the early 1700s right up through the 1970s. And that's because the Campbell Company, we all know the Campbell Soup Company, started collecting tureens and soup and serving vessels in the mid-1960s. And they wanted to make as they describe it, an American treasury of soup-related serving vessels. And they, when I look back at what they did, it knocks my socks off. They went to top dealers and auction houses and collections and acquired at the best level they could to represent European, English, American soup tureens and vessels like that. You couldn't assemble this collection today if you were trying to. And they had it as a museum, a corporate museum in Camden, New Jersey. And actually, while they were building that museum and assembling this collection as a gift really to this country, they toured the tureens to museums, more than 30 museums, as a free show. And often there's a fee involved in taking a touring show. So that was a nice incentive for museums to take the tureens as an exhibition, and people admired them in the 1970s in a way that you and I didn't get a chance to. And then they came back to Camden and were part of the museum display with, if you can imagine them, red velvet hangings and spotlighting, and just really making the most of that visual impact for the tureens, which of course no one in America was really using at that time. So it made them the works of art that they are, I think, was really the interpretive point there. And then that lost a little bit of appeal, or the company certainly was changing in its focus, and they had built this collection with the advice and assistance of a Winterthur curator at the time, someone from the staff. And so when it was time to think about a new home for the collection, that was a natural first look. And in 1995-96, the board here at Winterthur was happy to agree to take the collection, and then purpose-built. The Campbell company, the Tureens family, helped to fund the galleries that they're in today.
That's fantastic. And we're going to talk more about this collection when we return.
I'm Michael Evans from Battle Axe, and I'd like you to ask me about the 302.
Welcome back. We're talking about the amazing history behind the soup tureen when you take a look at this great collection here at Winterthur of the Campbell soup tureens. So talk a little bit about how big this collection is. There are 250 soup tureens, but it's bigger than that, right?
Absolutely, because the Campbell company didn't just collect tureens. They collected soup bowls and soup plates and spoons and ladles, anything that you would involve in some of the service of soup or stew or some of those other delectable dishes that were inside them. And I think the number is close to 450 total. So that was their gift to Winterthur in 1996.
That's pretty extensive. And when you look around, you see the materials that they're made from run the gamut. Talk to us a little bit about, from fine silver to what, earthenware?
Absolutely. In fact, the case right behind you has some good examples of that. Silver is a wonderful choice for hot beverages, and hot foods, except for the handles, because it's a conductor, and so you don't always want to use it for the part that you're going to hold on to. Porcelain, likewise, very precious. And in the 1700s, when porcelain was really coming into European and English dining habits, it was often imported from China or just getting a little bit of technology advancement in Europe in the 1710s to make porcelain that was truly a porcelain that was a durable hard paste, something that you could put soup into and it wouldn't stain or crack over time. But earthenware, faience, a lower level of that porcelain, if you will, was also very functional with a good glaze on it. And so the collection here contains all of those. And maybe a fun comparison just to look at through time is right behind you in the center, a sweet little almost lively, standing on those feet, tureen made by the Sèvres porcelain manufactory, the royal manufactory in France in the middle of the 1700s. It was good to have a king behind your technological development because it just would suck up money. It was so challenging to make this material at first. This is a beautiful example. And the Sèvres factory continued working. And so this is an example, much more contemporary, the 1970s, made by the same factory, in this case for the Campbell company, but also for a French president, Georges Pompidou. And so the factory maintained its presence and that tureen just at a time, I think, when we weren't really using tureens. As we alluded to earlier, they were a little bit more replaced by the crock pot and some more convenient dining practices.
So it's amazing to think, like you said, that these are the forefathers of the crock pot, and you can really see the evolution of the soup tureen as it goes from chinoiserie to what we see in modern times. And you mentioned having royalty to help you pay for some of this stuff. You have in the collection a couple of pieces that were owned or used in the service of some pretty famous royals.
Absolutely, we do. And behind that, just thinking, I mean, if only designers today were the best goldsmiths, the best sculptors, the best decorators of their day, and that's really who was working in these productions for the dining services entirely. And so we have some European leaders represented in the collection. Empress Catherine the Great of Russia, of a dish from Empress Elizabeth, prior to her. From Russia, we have some nobility from European houses, the Netherlands, and from the Habsburgs, and from some of the German countries. And then in our other galleries, we have George IV, whose coronation dinner we have a pewter tureen from his service as well, and others. So that's the level of consumer that was ordering tureens like the ones that are in this collection.
Well, let's talk about the silver ship. And it's Catherine the Great, the silver ship, right?
Mm-hmm. Empress Catherine, it's one of at least 11, probably 12, in 2 different sizes. And it's hard to identify this boat. It's a little round-ended. We'll have a look at it in a minute, but you can't imagine it actually navigating a waterway. But it's definitely to be representing a ship. And they were sailing down the table in grand banquet, if you can imagine it, when she took them as part of her progression down to inspect the Navy in the Black Sea, where her admiral, Gregory Potemkin, was there, and that was a special interest of hers as well.
Just so ornate, and when you look at it, just below it, there is a tureen from Germany that's, I mean, grand and gilded. Is that how you say it?
Gilded.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that.
It's a remarkable one, and again, one of multiples. So this is just one that was made for a wedding, and it was made in Berlin, and it's so synthetic, the level of artistry that's coming together, because the base is ormolu or gilt brass, which is designed first, of course, and made in a foundry and made with gilding, mercury gilding, fire gilding, which is a really toxic process and is something that it has to be so precise. And that's the base. And then the ceramics that are made fitting perfectly and representing things like lapis lazuli, but the stone, the blue stone with gold from Afghanistan and other parts of the world, but not. And so it fools your eye. And then the vessel itself has the most beautifully done botanical floral ornament around the lid that it's like a permanent bouquet right there on your table. You're not even thinking about food when you're looking at it. It's such a work of art.
And lastly, some American royalty. George Washington. You have 2 pieces connected to George Washington.
And George Washington's ancestry included someone in the Ball family, and forgive me, Mount Vernon, for not remembering the family lineage here, but one of the rare American tureens in this collection, made by American silversmith in New York, very much in the French taste, with an austere sort of architectonic oval-shaped tureen bowl on a pedestal. And so they often get confused with urns or trophies or things that were there to mark a special occasion, but in this case it's a tureen.
All right, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the funky side of the Campbell Soup collection. Stay with us.
Hi, I'm George with Candlelight Theater. We're having fun on the 302.
Welcome back. We're talking about the Campbell soup tureen collection here at Winterthur. We've talked about the fantastical. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the funky. Now, some of these are just amazing, a little out there perhaps. And tell us a little bit about, really, as things progressed past the ornate and the silver, artists really kind of, went there with the designs of these soup tureens.
That's almost an understatement. I think in the 1700s particularly, the imagination of these artists was just so rich. Looking at nature, so we have, for example, a boar's head not far behind you. It's very realistic. You almost feel like you can see the fur or the hair on him. And a turkey behind me, the American bird that was certainly enjoyed in Europe in the 16 and 1700s, or the rooster. I don't know if you can see that. Just fantastical animals. There's even one of a swan, which you wouldn't eat swan soup particularly, but that kind of a form. And then there are wonderful mythological sea monsters and dolphins and creations from classical mythology turning up on a lot of these vessels as well. And I guess you what caught your eye earlier were the pair of rabbits, which just looked like Peter Rabbit, who's been getting into Mr. McGregor's garden and eating the lettuce that he shouldn't be enjoying. So they're literary sources. There are sources from certainly European history, and then just creative imagination of the moment, taking these artists along their way.
One of the things that I think is really interesting is just the intricate detail. I know that you have a head of cabbage, and that was one of the more popular designs by Chelsea of England. Can you tell us a little bit about that company? Because they seem to really be, leaders of the funky pack, I guess.
Really wonderful modelers and designers making the molds that you could then take multiples from. And so that's a good craft practice in ceramics if you have a ceramics business, a porcelain company particularly. And Chelsea is one of the great firms founded in this time period in England, using some modelers and designers who were looking at that natural world. Botanicals in Kew Gardens were inspiring things, and certainly animals from England as well as other places.
And when you talk about botanicals, a lot of them have flowers either painted on them or molded as part of their design.
Yeah, you can really look at these so dimensionally. There's often some kind of a texture or a shape to the form of the tureen, and then decoration applied on top of that. Sometimes it's very naturalistic, like a bug that you could almost believe is landing on that plant. It has that kind of authenticity in the way that it's represented, and sometimes there just happens to be a lovely bouquet floating along on some kind of a ridge or a basket pattern or something that the modeler has put into the ceramic body.
Speaking of bodies, we got to talk about the Buddha.
Yes. Within this collection is, for me, a perplexing sculpture of Buddha, a seated Buddha made in porcelain, and his body does come into two pieces. His torso, his upper part, comes apart. But I can't imagine that he was ever to serve a soup or a broth unless it was in some ritual context, personally. And I'm afraid I don't know the history on that one specifically, but it's a rare form and really a wonderful part of this collection.
So another fascinating tureen is the bull's head.
Everyone loves that bull's head. He might be a water buffalo, but he has these fantastic curving horns that you can't believe are still there because it's made out of ceramics. It's porcelain made in China. And the head lifts off from the jaw, if you will, as the bowl. And one of the fun things to think about that is that if you had a really good steaming hot soup in there and the porcelain would take that, the steam would actually come out through the nostrils of the bull, so it looks like he's participating in the meal a little bit, as if he's breathing.
It's kind of like functional art.
Absolutely.
For your dinner table.
Absolutely. All of these are high art that is very functional in so many dimensions.
Let's talk about, I guess, the most fun, in my opinion, would be the stack of animals. That it's almost like you look at it and you think about Warhol or another modern artist. So what's the history behind that one?
That was a commission for the Campbell company. They not only collected historic Tureens, but they worked with some contemporary artists as well. And the artist was not thinking so much as a serving vessel as really some table sculpture that was pretty imaginative and playful and colorful, with animals in a tier stacked up, almost, I think, probably inspired by his interest in animals and carnivals and circuses, and it has that sort of playful nature to it that may have an undertone of a lot more meaning that I'm not reading into it, but is very imaginative.
Well, Anne, thank you so much. Who knew that soup tureens could be so entertaining and fun? Thank you so much for joining us.
We're so glad to have you here.
We'll be right back. Was good. For more information on Winterthur's Campbell Soup collection, all you have to do is visit winterthur.org. That'll do it for this week's show. We're going to leave you with a beauty shot of Winterthur's quarry garden. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. Tell them you saw it on the 302.